By the early 1970s, the Zodiac investigation wasn't just chasing a killer. It was chasing itself. Multiple police departments, multiple jurisdictions, multiple chains of command. Vallejo, Benicia, Napa, San Francisco. Each department held pieces of the puzzle. None wanted to hand them over. Reports weren't shared quickly. Evidence wasn't centralized. Witnesses were interviewed multiple times, sometimes with conflicting results. And slowly, quietly, the case began to rot from the inside. Not because no one cared, but because no one was fully in charge. Every Zodiac crime crossed an invisible line. County borders, city limits, agency authority. Each murder technically belonged to a different department. Each department had different priorities, budgets, and leadership. Instead of collaboration, there was competition. Who would catch the Zodiac? Who would get credit? Who would avoid blame? That competition mattered, because it shaped decisions that can't be undone. Evidence that should have been tested wasn't. Leads that didn't fit one department's theory were ignored. Suspects cleared in one jurisdiction were never re-examined in another. The killer exploited this fragmentation without ever needing to understand it. Chaos did the work for him. Public fear creates political pressure, and political pressure creates shortcuts. Police departments were under constant scrutiny. Newspapers demanded updates. Politicians demanded reassurance. So investigators did what institutions often do under stress. They narrowed their focus too early. Once Arthur Lee Allen became a strong suspect, everything began to orbit around him. Evidence was interpreted through that lens. Contradictions were minimized. Alternatives were sidelined. This wasn't corruption in the movie villain sense. It was something more dangerous. Confirmation bias wearing a badge. Arthur Lee Allen didn't fit the evidence, but he fit the story. A troubled past, disturbing behavior, suspicious comments, circumstantial connections. He looked like what people expected the Zodiac to look like. So investigators leaned in. And once that happened, stepping back became almost impossible. Admitting error would mean admitting years of misdirection. T would mean explaining to families that hope had been misplaced. T would mean accepting that the case was farther from resolution than ever. So the investigation stayed locked in place. Not solved. Not abandoned. Just stalled. While police focused on suspects, other voices faded into the background. Witnesses whose accounts didn't align with the dominant theory. Community members who noticed patterns outside official narratives. Survivors whose trauma made their memories inconveniently complex. Michael Mageau, the survivor of Blue Rock Springs, changed parts of his account over time. Instead of treating that as a trauma response, investigators treated it as unreliability. But trauma doesn't preserve memories neatly. It distorts time, sharpens fear, blurs detail. Discounting those voices wasn't just a procedural failure. It was a human one. The Zodiac could not have existed without the media. Not because they created him, but because they amplified him. Newspapers printed his letters. Television stations repeated his threats. Journalists debated whether publishing his words encouraged more violence. And yet, they kept publishing. Because fear sold. Mystery sold. And the Zodiac understood that better than anyone. He used the media to bypass police entirely, to speak directly to the public, to control the narrative. And in doing so, he forced law enforcement into a reactive position. Always responding. Never leading. As the Zodiac story grew, something else shrank. Empathy. Victims were discussed as statistics. Crime scenes became trivia. Families became background noise. The killer got a name, a symbol, a mythology. The dead got dates. This imbalance shaped public memory and investigative urgency. Cold cases fade faster when the story becomes entertainment. And the Zodiac case became one of the most entertaining unsolved mysteries in American history. That popularity didn't help solve it. It buried it. Here's a reality that's uncomfortable, but necessary. The Zodiac victims were young, mostly white, mostly middle class. And even then, their families struggled for sustained attention once the headlines moved on. So ask yourself, if these victims had been poorer, If they had been people of color, if they had lived in neighborhoods already ignored by police, would the investigation have lasted as long as it did? Or would it have gone cold faster? The Zodiac case is often framed as proof that police tried relentlessly, but it also exposes a darker truth. Even high-profile victims can be abandoned when fear becomes routine. Some Zodiac evidence still exists. Some doesn't. Items were misplaced. Records were incomplete. Early forensic practices failed to preserve material that modern science could have used. No one planned for DNA testing decades later. No one imagined genealogy databases. No one expected the case to outlive the investigators themselves. And yet, that's exactly what happened. Now, every lost envelope, every unlogged fingerprint, every undocumented decision is a door that can never be reopened. When police departments eventually closed or deprioritized the case, they moved on. The families did not. For them, time didn't heal, the IT stretched. Every new theory reopened wounds. Every breakthrough raised hope just enough to hurt again. Every documentary reminded them that the world remembered the killer, but not the cost. Some family members stopped watching. Others watched everything. All of them waited. The Zodiac didn't just exploit fear. He exposed structural limits. Law enforcement in the 1960s wasn't designed for multi-jurisdictional serial crimes, media-driven investigations, anonymous communication warfare, crimes without clear motive or end. The Zodiac forced institutions to adapt in real time, and people fell through the cracks while they tried. The Zodiac case may never be solved, not because of incompetence, but because systems are human. They panic. They assume. They cling to narratives. They protect themselves. Justice doesn't always lose to evil. Sometimes it loses to inertia. There may never be an arrest. But accountability doesn't end with handcuffs. It looks like remembering victims without glorifying killers, teaching investigative failures, not hiding them, acknowledging bias and structural limits, centering families instead of myths. The Zodiac doesn't need another suspect. He needs fewer admirers. The Zodiac Killer didn't just disappear. He dissolved into a system that couldn't hold him. And the tragedy isn't just that we don't know who he was. It's that so many people did everything right afterward and still got nothing in return. No answers, no justice, no peace. Just echoes.